So hello and welcome to another episode of this thing I call Chosen Idea. It is episode number 2 of season 3. I haven't been able to jump on this right away because I was working on the 2021 Sony Vlog Challenge. Got an email from Sony about the Vlog Challenge. I'm like, wow, this looks like a really great opportunity. I'll give it a shot. Anyway, that is posted. If you haven't checked that out already, I invite you to do so. And the next is a shout out to a new subscriber. I noticed that some Jaime Torres subscribed to my channel, and I'm like thinking to myself, is that the Jaime Torres that I worked with many moons ago when I was a teacher at a local college? And it turns out that it is. He's actually got his own YouTube channel as well. Very technical and super smart and talented guy. Anyway, thank you for subscribing, Jaime. You noticed that I subscribed to your channel as well. Anyway, that's Jaime Torres. All right, let's move on. So in this episode, we're obviously talking about macro photography and how I kind of modified or added to my Tamron, my new Tamron lens, the 70-300, to use it as a macro lens and what sort of accessories I needed for that. So let's take a look at some of the stuff I've been doing. So not too shabby, right? Considering it's not a dedicated macro lens, it's just the Tamron 70-300 with some add-ons. Add-ons I can't take credit for knowing about. There's a YouTuber named Michael Waddell. I've mentioned him before on my channel. He's a macro specialist and he's also a Sony shooter, which is of interest to me, but I've been spending a lot of time on his channel. He knows a lot about macro. And he has a very sort of compact setup, which I'm all about. A lot of these macro setups, especially the lighting, could be really unwieldy, something I wouldn't carry around personally. And Michael's setup is quite compact, and it can be very affordable, especially when adapting an existing lens you might have. Anyway, one of his suggestions is to add a magnifier to the front of it and of course extension tubes to the back, as many of you might have guessed. So there are a lot of lenses out there, maybe one that's in your camera bag right now that would be great to adapt for use as a macro lens. So you can apply anything that you learn in this video to maybe one of your lenses. Just give it a try and see how it goes. So when you start with a lens that suffers from very little diffraction and is also a very sharp lens, it makes for a great combination when adapting to macro. Diffraction really comes into play when you add a magnifier to the front of your lens. It not only adds to it, but also magnifies any existing diffraction that is present. Those of you who've been looking into dedicated macro lenses like those from companies like Laowa will notice that the higher magnification macro lenses are typically within the 70 to 100 millimeter focal length. When you're using this lens as a macro lens, you'll find that it's only useful between around 70 to just a little north of 100 millimeters. Laowa has a lot of very cool specialty lenses, and one of them is their ultra-wide macro, which I'd love to get my hands on one day. If you take the time to learn how to use it, it can produce spectacular results. So it's nice to start with a lens that already has a pretty close minimum focusing distance, but as most of you have probably guessed, you're going to want to reduce that minimum focusing distance even further by adding extension tubes. The extension tubes that I bought are from Velo. I bought them specifically to get closer shots for some of the video work I was doing, but now they've come in pretty handy doing some of this macro stuff. So extension tubes are relatively inexpensive, and that's because effectively all they are is a spacer between your camera body and your lens. These Velo tubes were originally bought with the intent to use them for video. That's why I bought tubes with the connections for autofocus on the inside. Now for close-up or even macro video, as long as you're not getting too close, you can use autofocus, but you'll find that your autofocus is pretty ineffective at high magnifications. So that wonderful YouTuber, Michael Waddell, who I was mentioning earlier, I was watching his channel one day, and in this episode he was talking about people who just want to start out in macro and don't want to necessarily invest in a dedicated macro lens, that there is an option for them to look at magnifiers. And the magnifier he was recommending was from a company called Raynox. They're a company out of Japan, and I figured that if Michael was recommending these Raynox magnifiers, they have to be pretty decent, because he wouldn't be recommending any kind of junk. So immediately I jump onto Amazon. They couldn't find anything there, as I recall. And then I went onto eBay, and I found a seller in the US, I'm in Canada, who was the most cost-effective option, because unfortunately ordering directly from Japan was more expensive, which I find is more often the case whenever it's something from Japan, that it's always more expensive than just going to the North American distributor or what have you. Anyway, so I'm intently waiting, you know, watching the tracking as the Raynox gets closer and closer. And then, you know, when it finally arrives, I'm so excited, and I open up the outer box to find that inner box inside, you know, like those little Russian dolls, and I'm opening away. And then, so, you know that old saying, if you haven't got something nice to say, don't say it at all? Well, it's not so realistic to live by that if you work in the creative business, because sometimes you may have to tell people things that they don't like to hear about their work, and it's your job. So I was like an art director, and that's like in an ad agency, if you're making poop sandwiches, you're like the sous chef, and then the actual chef is the creative director, or maybe a senior art director. Anyway, so I'm the sous chef of the poop sandwich. You say something nice, like, oh, nice shirt today, so-and-so. By the way, about that job, yeah, we don't really like, and then you go and shovel the and then at the end, you know, you say something encouraging. So when the package showed up with the magnifier inside, I was like, I've seen nicer packaging on a dollar store squirt gun, you know what I'm saying? Poop, and then poop, and then poop on top. I'm sorry. Raynox, if you're listening, I'll redesign your package for you free, okay? Anyway, so what almost makes up for that package design, actually completely makes up for the package design, is the fact that there's this little plastic box that's in that box, and then the Raynox is inside, and then look, there's a little lens cover too, and then there's a piece of foam they give you, and you can put that foam on top, and guess what? Conveniently, those Velo extension tubes, oh my, look at that! So good, eh? So what do I think of the build quality of this thing? So this is the magnifier itself. Now this outer part of it, I think they probably could have did a nicer job with it, but it seems fairly well made. And these springs on the back are quite strong, which is important, because if you've got a lens like the Tamron, this is actually the max size filter thread on here that this will accept. So, and that locks right onto there like that, and quite effectively, I'd say. It's pretty good. But if you have a 49mm filter thread on the lens that you're adapting, you can actually screw this out of here and put it on directly. That'd be nice, but how many of us are going to be using it on a 49? I have no idea. An impressive piece of glass in there. It's actually more than one piece of glass. On the box, it actually says that 2 group, 3 element. There you go. So one of the major challenges of macro photography is focus. And that's two-part. It's one, just trying to keep your subject, in frame and in focus is one part of it, because you've got this tiny subject, you're at magnification. Any movement here is a massive movement within your viewfinder, much like telephoto photography. And then the second part of that is trying to maintain as deep a depth of field as possible, in contrast to, say, a portrait photographer who may want a shallow depth of field to separate their subject in the foreground from the background, which they want blurry. In macro photography, you want as much clear as possible. And so you would take the opposite approach. You would be using apertures that were very small, or high f numbers like f16 and f22. Now, the problems with using small apertures is twofold. One, you'll be increasing diffraction by reducing the size of your aperture. That's why I was saying starting with a lens that has low diffraction to begin with is a good idea. And you're also using maybe a magnifier, and a magnifier can magnify diffraction as well. But the major downside of using these small apertures or high f numbers is you're reducing the amount of light coming in. And you need a ton of light for macro photography, because you can't decrease your shutter speed to allow more light in, because again, chances are you're moving around a lot and you're usually hand holding. So you're going to want a shutter speed high enough that if you finally get that shot, it's not going to be just this movement from your camera blurring everything, obscuring everything. So you want a high enough shutter speed to combat either your subject moving or your movement. There could be wind, it could be an insect walking around, or you want to freeze its wings or what have you. It's not usually an option to reduce your shutter speed. So there are a couple cases where you can reduce your shutter speed to help you out a little bit, bringing more light into your camera. One is if you're shooting video and you may want to shoot at 1/50th or 1/60th, give you that cinematic motion blur, and at the same time let a lot more light in. Now, shooting stills, the only option you have when you reduce your shutter speed is to have a subject that's not moving and to have your camera on a tripod, at which point you might as well be doing focus stacking. Focus stacking is when you're shooting multiple exposures with your focus plane in different places, combining those images to create an image that's sharp from foreground to background. So what is a macro photographer to do? Stop keeping us in suspense, Marco. You need more light. It's the only real solution. And I'm not talking a brighter day to shoot on, because that's not going to necessarily cut it. And we don't want to increase our ISO either, because that's going to introduce noise, and we want the highest quality image as possible. So what are we going to do? Well, flash would be the way to go. That's what most macro photographers rely on, and sometimes they've got like an array of these flashes. They've got this big huge rig. I'm into compact. I like traveling with my stuff, and Michael Waddell had this solution of using a little compact flash like this. I think he uses the same one. It was a TT350 Godox, very nice, roughly around 70 bucks, between 70 and 80 bucks, depending on whether you're talking US or Canadian. This is fantastic. But he also combines this with a diffuser. That makes all the difference. The reason that a lot of these photographers are using like this array of flashes is to get this nice evenly lit subject from all around. You're not necessarily getting that with this solution, because the light is coming primarily from the top, but the light is nice and diffuse once you've got this diffuser, and I'll show you what I'm using for that in a second here. By the way, a little bit more about this flash. The really nice thing about this is the fact that it uses 2 AA batteries. So using standard AA's is really nice, because if you're off somewhere and you run out of juice and you haven't got any batteries left, you can just, you know, pop in somewhere they sell batteries and buy a couple AA's. So this diffuser, they're about $4 on eBay. I think you can find them on Amazon too. Yeah, and so, whoa, that is it right there. You can see what looks like dirt here on the front. It's not dirt, it's actually just dye that transfers off of this little bag. I think I might have got it wet or something. Mine is ripping a little bit here, as you can see, no big deal. The lens just goes through that opening there. And then what happens is the flash, you angle it forwards and it hits that. And then it basically makes that into like this big light source, which really softens up the light, and nice results anyway. And that was another tip from Michael Waddell, so thanks. So I'm going to put up an image here of what the whole thing looks like together that you can take a look at. And I also did a little test here with this needle hanging off a thread. Oh, there you go, you can see how much detail. So I've been having a ton of fun with this whole macro thing. I've always had an interest in it. I've always wanted to get into it. Hopefully you guys got something out of this as well. Well, you know the drill. If you like this video, give me a thumbs up. If not, that's okay too. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't yet, and that bell. Until next time, keep working to make your chosen idea a reality. All right, peace.